to pick up where we left off yesterday and still talking about proofs. Yesterday we were in our notes, we kind of went over these 5 bullet points and we saw examples that kind of touched on those. We didn't necessarily see one specifically talk about bisector, but we did see midpoint, and bisector and midpoint are really similar to each other. And you probably also saw a bisector show up on your homework from yesterday. But the only one that we really didn't see an example of in class yesterday was this last one, when we have alternate interior angles. And that's because we didn't have any problems yesterday that talked about there being parallel sides. So that's what I want us to go over today. There's only one that we need to fill out on your guys' notes today that includes parallel sides. But then I'm also going to take a look at the worksheet that you'll be getting today, and we'll do one of those as well. So if we look at number 4, because that should be the only one that's left on this page, we want to first begin with our given information, okay? So what does the given information even say for this problem? Like, how would you read this first part? We should be saying that side AB is parallel, that's what those double bars mean, to ED. Okay, so this would have been very similar to what we saw in the last unit where we said like line L is parallel to line M. Instead of saying lines like that, though, we're dealing with these sides on triangles. So they're telling you that those sides AB and ED are parallel to each other. And you can even see on the picture, they have those arrows placed on those sides. Remember, we've talked in the past that those arrows are telling you that those lines would be parallel to each other. Now, if they didn't have the arrows on them, you would want to make sure that you add those arrows to your picture so that you know that those lines are parallel, okay? Then we also have the fact that AC is congruent to EC. So that's all of the given information. And I am going to add markings to AC and EC because those are not on my picture. So I'm going to give each of those a dash. Okay, now let's think about yesterday. After we wrote our given information down, we would use anything in the given that maybe they didn't like explicitly say something was congruent. So when we talked about something being a midpoint yesterday, we would go on to say that the side that was being cut in half or that had the midpoint on it, we would state then these two parts of the segment are equal to each other because of the definition of midpoint. So we need to do that with these parallel lines, okay? Now I'm going to kind of try to help you out here a little bit by thinking about if we extended these parallel lines. So AB is this parallel line here, so I'm just going to go over it with my highlighter, and DE is the other parallel line. I don't want it to highlight that. There we go. And when we're looking at parallel lines and we're trying to use alternate interior angles, we probably need to find a transversal that we can use here in order for us to be able to find the alternate interior lines. Now, do you guys see a line, a transversal that we could create that would intersect both of those parallel lines? There's actually 2 that we could use here. We could say that the line BD is a transversal, or we could say that the line AE is a transversal, because both of those intersect those parallel lines, okay? So depending on maybe which one you were thinking about, you can decide which one you want to use. I don't care if you use BD or if you use AE, either one works for you to use as the transversal, okay? Now, depending on which one you use is going to then dictate what alternate interior angles we focus on. So let me just go and get rid of that second transversal. Let's just focus on BD for right now, and I'll come back to that second transversal in just a minute. But if we look at this picture now, you need to be able to identify the parallel lines and the transversal, and then be able to figure out where are the alternate interior angles. So remember, alternate interior angles should be on opposite sides of the transversal. So in this case, opposite sides of that green line, and they should be in between the parallel lines. So those are my yellow lines that I have highlighted. Do you guys see where the alternate interior angles would be? You should see one up here by where B is at, and the other one would be down here where D is at. Okay? Now let's say you had used the other transversal. So I'm going to kind of back up here for a second. I'm going to put this line back in. Let's say that we had used this as my transversal. My alternate interior angles then would switch to here and here, A and E. So you can kind of see, depending on what transversal you are using, is going to change what pair of alternate interior angles you can use, okay? Again, I don't care which one you use. In fact, you could actually use both if you felt like it would help you. If you felt like you could use what's given right here, you could probably write all that down and just say like, hey, these angles are equal to each other because of parallel lines, because we see these alternate interior angles. And actually, I think we would have enough to say angle, angle, side to be able to prove that the triangles are congruent. However, maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe some of you also saw vertical angles in this picture, and you want to use vertical angles because that's something that you're used to doing from what we saw yesterday. There's a couple of options here. Now, if you use vertical angles, you may still be able to use angle, angle, side. Depending on what they provide you with in the given, it might switch your test a little bit. But as long as you can find 3 pieces of information and it works for those 5, one of those 5 tests that we've talked about, you have some flexibility in what you want to do, okay? So I'm going to kind of get rid of some of this. I'm going to come back here. Let me get rid of these highlights just so we can kind of focus back down on the triangle. Now down here, I need to state that those angles that I made arcs on are equal to each other. So for step number 2, we were using alternate interior angles to do that. And we need to name them. Now, yesterday when we talked about naming vertical angles, we had to be very specific on what the angle names were. We couldn't have just said, yesterday we had like angle C, and we talked about how there's like 4 angles in the picture, okay? The same thing's happening here, but I'm not dealing with vertical angles right now. So if I said angle B, would you guys know what angle I'm looking at? Or if I said angle D, would you guys know what angle I'm looking at? In this case, we should just be able to call it by its single letter because there is only one angle that has B as its vertex, and there is only one angle that has D as its vertex. So you don't have to be as nitpicky with the names of these angles because B and D are not being shared by the 2 triangles. So we should just be able to say angle B is congruent to angle D because they're alternate interior angles. Again, if we had gone back to that other transversal, I would say angle E is congruent to angle A because those are also alternate interior angles. So again, we could add that to our step here as well, and that would allow us to finish up our proof because we would have angle, angle, side. But again, some of you might have noticed that there's vertical angles, okay? And maybe you want to use those vertical angles. So the vertical angles are those ones that are kind of in the middle where that C is. So this side would be equal to this side. Now, in this case, we can't just say angle C, okay? Think about what we talked about yesterday. We'd have to name these a little bit more specifically. So if I said angle BCA, how would you guys fill out the second half? It'd be DCE. Remember, you have to make sure you keep like pieces together. And so that would be vertical angles. Okay, and then if I look, I've got angle, angle, side marked. So I should be able to end and say triangle BCA is congruent to triangle DCE. Again, that's just coming from my proof statement because it works for angle, angle, side. So that gets the proof done in 4 steps. If we had done back up here, I'm just going to add this on in a different color. If on step 2 I had also included the fact that angle E is congruent to angle A, because those are also alternate interior angles, that would be this angle here and this angle here, then I could have actually just jumped straight to that step, and I would have still been able to use angle, angle, side. I wouldn't need to use the vertical angle step in the middle. Okay, but we did. So either proof, whether you do it in those 3 steps because you use both of the alternate interior angle pairs you see, or you decide to use the vertical angles, are going to get you to the same end result. And they both work. So it's okay to go about that 2 different ways. But I just wanted to point that out to you because sometimes students think that if they go one way versus the other, that it's going to be wrong or that I'm going to be nitpicky about that. I mean, as long as you get to the end result and it's right and like everything is justifiable, then you should be good. Okay. Now I want to go to your homework. So if you don't have the worksheet yet, you're going to want to get that before we do this. And we should be on this page here. And you'll notice in the given, all of these have parallel lines involved. And there's only 6 on this worksheet. Yesterday's had a lot more proofs. This one has a fewer amount. And I just want to go over, I'm just going to pick one here. I'm actually going to probably just jump down to letter C just because this is a little different than the one that we had in your notes. I don't want to do one that's exactly like what we just did in our notes. So I want to take a look here at letter C, but I'm hoping you guys recognize that there are parallel lines again in the given information. So let's all start by writing out the given. Okay, based on the given right now, let's start with the parallel lines because this is what we just talked about. We want to look for alternate interior angles. If you need to do what I did, highlight, like get out your own highlighters, get out your own colored pens. It's okay. I mean, it's your homework. You guys can mark up whatever you want on your homework assignment. So if you need to highlight those parallel lines, again, we're talking about CB. Those are the ones with the arrows on it. So these 2 lines here are the parallel lines, and then you have a choice. You could use EB as your transversal, or you could use CD as your transversal. Let's just go ahead and focus on EB for right now. What would be the alternate interior angles there? Angle E would be congruent to angle B because those are alternate interior. Okay, and I'm going to abbreviate. You guys can do the same thing. Now, you might also be seeing vertical angles in here, so we could still use that if we wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and mark E and B. Okay, but I'm going to do this one a little different than the one we had in our notes because I want you to just be able to see how you could go either way. I'm going to go ahead and think about what if I did use that other transversal as well. So what if I highlight CD? What would be another pair of alternate interior angles? It'd be C and D this time. So I could say angle C is congruent to angle D, still because of alternate interior. So I'm just going to keep that on the same line because they're the same kind of angle pair. So I don't need to rewrite that reason. And then up here, I'm going to go ahead and mark that C and D. Okay, and then I'm going to get rid of my highlighting just so you can kind of see where we're at. Now, I didn't have to do that. I could have just used one pair of alternate interior angles, and then I could have went and stated my vertical angles. Okay, and some of you might still be thinking like, well, do we go to the vertical angles next? Well, if we mark up the vertical angles, which would be a fair thing to do, That would leave me with angle, angle, angle marked. Is angle, angle, angle one of the 5 tests that we're allowed to use? It's not, okay? We don't have AAA. We have side, or angle, side, angle, or angle, angle, side, but we don't have one with all 3 angles, so we can't use that one. So while I understand why people would maybe want to use the vertical angles right now, it's really not going to be helpful for me when I'm trying to prove that these triangles are congruent. So I want you to go back to the given. Okay, we've used the parallel lines like pretty much up because we use both sets of alternate interior angles, but what haven't we talked about yet from the given? We still need to address the fact that we have a midpoint. Okay, so what does midpoint do? Midpoint cuts something in half. Okay, so it's saying that A is the midpoint of segment CD. So CD is the whole thing, A is in the middle. So what pieces would now be equal to each other? CA and DA, right? And we want to really be careful about how we name those. We want to keep like markings together. So I said CA, which means we have to say DA because C and D are both marked the same way and A is shared in the middle. And so I'm going to say definition of midpoint. Okay, so now look at what I have marked. Do I have enough? Do I have a test that works? If we mark this up, this is an angle, and a side. AAS is one of our 5 tests, so we should be able to finish it here and say triangle EAD is congruent to triangle BAC because of angle, angle, side. Now, if you hadn't used both sets of alternate interior angles, if you only used one, and then you had talked about vertical angles in there, then you would probably have 5 steps instead of 4, okay? Because you would have said given, you would have used one pair of alternate interior angles, you would have stated the vertical angles for step 3, you still would have needed to use your definition of midpoint for step 4, and then that congruency would be your last step, which would then be step 5. So depending on how you went about it, you would have 4 steps if you went this way. You'd have 5 steps if you wanted to include those vertical angles like we talked about on the one in your notes. But I just wanted to show you that you can kind of go either way here and still get the same end result. So it doesn't really matter which route you go when you're dealing with these alternate interior angles and these vertical angles. Now, I just want to point this one out to you, like down here at E, there are no vertical angles in this picture. Okay, those are 2 triangles that are like sandwiched together. So you're probably not looking for vertical angles. You are going to be looking for something else, though, that we talked about yesterday. So maybe go back and look at your notes from yesterday if you don't know what I'm talking about, because we talked about these examples where those triangles overlap. Okay, but you should now, everyone should have their homework. You should have this one done. That leaves you guys with 5 left. So I want you guys to be using the rest of the class to try to finish up this. If you get stuck, use your notes as like maybe something to go back and look at, and then we can still talk about things together too if we're still really confused. Okay?